Good afternoon, everybody. I'm
Hi,
Amelia.
I'm Tom.
We have a
Here we
great,
are.
yeah, here we are. We have a great story for you today. Super story. So Tom's going to tell it to us.
All right. So Jesus and his four new disciples went to Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath day, he entered into the synagogue and taught. Now, all those in the synagogue were astounded at his teaching, because he taught at authority, not like the scribes. And the synagogue, there was a man with an unclean spirit, and he began to shout at Jesus, "Aha! What is it between us and you, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and said to him, "Be silent and come out of him." And convulsing him, crying out with a loud voice, the spirit came out. And they were all amazed. And they saying to one another, "Hey, what is this? A new teaching and with authority? And he even commands the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And immediately his fame spread throughout the region of Galilee. That's the story.
That's the story. Thank you, Tom. That's great. Okay, and it is actually a story. I had an interesting experience the other day. Somebody said to me, "I'd like to do this because it's a narrative, like so and so was suggesting we do," and it was a psalm, which really isn't a narrative. So stories have, they have a setting, a time, and a place. Things are happening. They have characters who relate to one another. They have a plot. So things unfold, one after the other. Sometimes you have flashbacks. Often you have a surprise or you have a conflict in the plot. And so this is a story we have today about kind of what happened with Jesus right after he called his first four disciples in the Gospel of Mark. So tell us a little bit about that setting. It says that he went to the synagogue in Capernaum on the Sabbath. So talk a little bit, if you would, about the synagogue back then, and then also about the significance of the Sabbath.
Synagogues were small buildings. Some of them, the remnants of synagogues from the first century, of which there are very few, are very small. And so you can't think of, a big place. This is a little place. And there might be, 25, 35 people, maybe, who could get into the synagogue. And that was the place where people gathered on Sabbath day. Jesus then, what's great about this, there are more immediatelys in this story than any story in the whole of the gospel. There are three immediatelys. In Greek, the word thous. And so it gets off.
If you forget what comes next in the story, you could just say immediately, right?
That's right.
Immediately. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So it gets off to a fast start. So once the disciples are called, Mark is off and going, and everything is happening right now. So it has that kind of, great energy that also is reflected in what Jesus did, that, he immediately went in the synagogue. So, yeah.
Okay, and so the Sabbath, that's in terms of the setting, that's the time of the
Yeah.
week,
Yep. Everybody, holy day,
holy day.
rest, no working.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And he encountered a man there. So then we have the introduction. Well, no, actually, first we have this business about him teaching with authority. So what did that mean that he surprised them because he taught with authority, not like the scribes? So who were the scribes? Why did they not have authority in comparison to Jesus?
Yeah, well, I think there's a contrast here between Jesus as an oral teacher, as one who had passion and authority that came from his energy. Whereas the scribes were literate guys, they were lawyers. They supposedly they had some authority, but they didn't have any authority like Jesus. He just had this, magnetic quality about him. So.
Okay. And so then we have the introduction of the next character in the story, a man with an unclean spirit.
Right.
Which, I've taught this story a lot, so it doesn't seem like any big deal, but actually we don't go around talking about people with unclean spirits. Talk a little bit about what that would have meant to folks back then. What was the significance of being unclean, and what was an unclean spirit?
Yeah. Well, an unclean spirit was one that was not clean, that it was dirty.
Well, that's not helpful. Okay, excuse me.
Well, it is. So an unclean spirit would be a spirit that was not fit for public consumption. It was a violent spirit, often. It was a spirit that was also regarded as an evil spirit. It was often a violent spirit. So this spirit was a violent spirit, and he immediately sets up, a conflict with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so we've seen groups that have an unclean spirit.
Yeah, like on January 6th.
Right. That are bent on violence.
Right.
That are bent on taking over. And so this unclean spirit was one that was out for a fight, and was, completely interrupting the synagogue service. So it was a totally disrupting thing.
Yeah, that language of clean and dirty you mentioned. It's interesting because I've taught this story a lot in the context of both prisons and the jail downtown. And in those contexts, I mean, all the time, people are talking about whether they're clean or not, whether their urine is dirty, meaning has drugs, and certainly for people who are addicted, they connected right away with the sense of being unclean, because the drugs make them crazy, and are very destructive to themselves, and then they have destructive actions towards others. So that's a very relevant concept even in today's world. I know also, though, that it was very relevant to people in the first century, because in Leviticus talks about being unclean. Don't they have laws about cleanliness?
Yeah.
And
that was part of the issue, was whether you were possessed by a spirit beyond your control. That was an evil spirit that would take over. It's like drugs. It just takes over. And perverts and corrupts people.
Okay, you mentioned that it was a strong conflict between Jesus and the man with the unclean spirit. What was the source of this conflict? It was Was it like a battle? Almost that kind of
Yeah,
a series
yeah,
of
I think
conflict?
so. Yes, definitely.
And yeah,
No, Jesus is a Messiah. He was baptized. He's like, Mark has said that he's a messianic figure. Well, Messiahs, go into battle. In the traditions of Israel, they go into battle against the Philistines, against Israel's enemies. The enemy here is unclean spirits. And so Jesus enters into battle, I think is not, and that's what's set up. The translation of the Greek is, I think, not great. What do you have to do with us? That isn't, the Greek is, what is it between us and you, Jesus of Nazareth? It's like setting up a gunfight. All right, it's down to the two of us. Let's have it out. So that's the spirit of this.
yeah.
What is it between you and us?
Yeah.
Jesus, have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. So this is a confrontation.
Yeah. So, and this is right, like the first thing that happens after Jesus calls his disciples. So right at the beginning,
Right.
There's this major conflict.
That's right.
That's almost more, I mean, it's not between him and a person. It's almost more like a cosmic conflict or something.
Yeah. Well, and that's the pronoun. It's us.
Yeah.
What is it between us and you?
Yeah.
So it's this unclean spirit is part of the chorus, the group of unclean spirits.
Okay. So in addition to Jesus and this man with the unclean spirit, who he does clean, I mean, he casts out this unclean spirit just by saying, well, first he tells him, be quiet, right? That's kind of interesting.
Right.
Be
Be
quiet.
silent.
Be silent.
Come out of him.
Yeah.
So he was disrupting the service. So he told him to shut up and to come out of him.
Yeah.
And so convulsing him, crying out with a loud voice, the spirit came out.
What was the convulsing business about?
Well, that was often the characteristic of unclean spirits, is that they would seize people. And so they fought to hold on to their place inside a person. It's not.
So they didn't go easily.
No, they didn't go easily. And it's like what happens with people who are withdrawing from drugs.
Oh, yeah.
They get the shakes and it's terrible.
Yeah.
Well, this is like that.
Yeah.
This unclean spirit seizes him.
Yeah.
And possesses him.
Right.
And doesn't come out without a fight.
Right. Okay. So we got Jesus, the man of the unclean spirit, and then you have people in the synagogue. First, they are described as being amazed at Jesus's teachings, and then after this, witnessing this incident, they're astounded again.
Right. They're amazed.
Yeah. Okay. So just want to talk about that audience response a little bit.
Well, it's an invitation to everybody who's listening to the story to identify with the people who are in the synagogue. And so hopefully the end of the story precedes is amazement at this kind of confrontation. And this was not normal. This didn't happen all the time. So there aren't any other stories like this in the whole tradition of Israel, of casting out an unclean spirit. So this is a redefinition of the enemy. It's not the Philistines, it's the powers of evil. It's the powers that possess and control people.
Yeah, and it's not even the man himself, right?
Right.
It's the unclean spirit, and there's a sense that then the man is released from this,
right.
this evil spirit, this unclean spirit.
Right.
that, which makes me think something else I want to talk about my experience engaging the stories with men in prison. We kind of decided to act it out that day. And so, we had people who were guys who were sitting around being the
People in the synagogue.
persons in the synagogue, and
Right.
somebody who was Jesus, another 3 men who volunteered to be, well, 4 men, I guess, who volunteered to be his disciples. And so Jesus comes in, the 4 men come in after him, and then the man with the unclean spirit gets up, and I'm kind of narrating it, I'm sort of telling a story, but when it came to that place, they took over and, did their sort of little lines. And as soon as the unclean spirit, that man springs up, the disciples, right? They all get, right in front of Jesus, they're ready to protect him, which like good disciples would, they've got his back.
Right.
And they're loud, they're face to face. I'm thinking the alarms are all going to go off and the COs are going to be running in any minute. But what happened? So Jesus, casts out the demon, and there's the silence that falls on the whole room.
Yeah.
And the two guys who were, portraying Jesus and the man who no longer had an unclean spirit, they embraced each other.
Yeah.
It was incredible because men in prison don't embrace each other.
Right.
That's like a big no-no, but they did, and everyone understood it was this major reconciliation that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one of the things about the story is that Jesus, we may see people and all we can see is how demonic they appear to be to us. But he saw beyond that unclean spirit that was in this man, got rid of the spirit, and was, reconciled with a man. So, yeah.
Right. Yep.
Great story.
And,
You
and
wanna talk
the man was really embracing him because he was thankful.
Yeah.
Because he was now free.
Yeah. Right. So how does this story relate to justice ministries other than,
Well, there it is.
might have a lot to
There's
do
the
with
word.
drugs, with imprisonment? How do you see it?
Well, there's the word is freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom. What happens with unclean spirits is that those unclean spirits oppress people. So the spirit of violence, the spirit of hatred, the spirit of greed, the spirit of domination, those spirits are what oppress people. And so Jesus set people free. Well, justice ministries now set people free. So what you're talking about is in relation to telling the story in prison and in the jail. What happens is that people experience in the story something that happens for them, that they may still be in prison, but they have a degree of spiritual freedom that is possible for them. And that creates a whole different environment. And that is then part of justice ministry, is the transformation of prisons. So Jesus in many ways redefines the character of what oppresses people, sets them free. That's what justice ministries do now, is that they set people free from the things and the spirits that oppress them. There's of others who are seized by hatred, prejudice, violence, and I can go on with the list. We know those spirits are.
Yeah.
Jesus sets people free.
Yeah.
And we are called then to follow in his footsteps and to be disciples of his who set people free.
And advocates for a more just society.
Right.
Maybe we're moving in that direction a tiny bit now these days, we hope.
Well,
Right.
we hope.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that each one of us individually can do what we can to bring a spirit of calm and and graciousness into those that we encounter, however difficult they may seem to be.
Right.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Have a great go.
Bye.
Bye.